I'm Elena, and I'm 34 years old, and I never imagined that the seat I had, occupied for 6 years at my husband's family table, would one day be taken by another woman while everyone watched and said nothing. But that's exactly what happened on the night that changed everything I thought I knew about loyalty and love. Because when I walked into the dining room that evening, dressed carefully, carrying the same warmth I always brought to these gatherings, I found Victoria sitting in my chair, the one beside Daniel, the one that had always been mine since the day we married, back when he had nothing but a failing hardware store and a mountain of debt that kept him awake at night. Back when I worked 2 jobs so he could keep the lights on in that store, back when I believed in him so fiercely that I gave up my own dreams to become the foundation he stood on. And now, after 5 years of success, after the business grew into something bigger than either of us had dreamed, after the mansion and the cars and the respect he commanded, in every room he entered, he stood there beside Victoria and said nothing as she smiled at me from my own seat. And for a moment I felt the air leave my lungs, because I realized that 34 years of my life had led me to this exact humiliation, standing in a room full of people who once called me family, waiting for someone, anyone, to acknowledge that something was deeply wrong. But the silence stretched on, and Daniel wouldn't even meet my eyes. And I understood then that he had already made his choice long before this dinner, that Victoria wasn't some passing mistake, but something he had been building quietly while I was busy loving him the only way I knew how. And just as I turned to leave, just as I decided that my dignity mattered, more than staying in a room where I clearly wasn't wanted anymore, Grandma Margaret's voice cut through the silence like a blade, sharp and commanding in a way I had never heard from a woman well into her 80s. "Get up," she said, and at first nobody moved, because surely she couldn't mean what everyone thought she meant. But she said it again, louder this time, staring directly at Victoria. "Get up from that seat right now, because you have no right to sit there. No right at all." And the room fell into a stunned quiet as Grandma Margaret rose from her own chair, using her cane for support, but standing tall with a fire in her eyes that I hadn't seen since her husband's funeral. "That seat belongs to Elena," she continued, "the woman who slept on a mattress on the floor of a 1-bedroom apartment so Daniel could keep his store open. The woman who sold her mother's jewelry, the only thing she had left of her, to cover payroll when he couldn't. The woman who sat beside his hospital bed for 11 days when he collapsed from exhaustion and told me she would rather die than watch him give up. And now you sit there in a dress that costs more than his first month of revenue, smiling like you belong in a place you never once helped build." And I stood frozen, tears burning in my eyes. Not from sadness anymore, but from something else entirely. Something like vindication, as Grandma Margaret turned to Daniel and asked him the question that seemed to hang in the air the entire evening. "Do you even remember who stood beside you when you had nothing? Or has success made you forget? The very hands that lifted you out of the dirt?" And Daniel, for the first time all night, looked truly ashamed, his jaw tightening, his eyes finally finding mine, full of something that looked like regret but felt too late to matter. Because in that moment I realized that I didn't need his apology to know my own worth. I didn't need this table or this family or even this marriage to define who I was, because I had already proven my strength long before any of them noticed. And as Victoria quietly rose from the seat, gathering her purse without a word, I felt something shift inside me, a quiet, powerful clarity that told me I deserved so much more than being fought for after the damage was already done. So instead of sitting back down, I turned to Grandma Margaret, kissed her cheek, thanked her for seeing me when no one else would, and walked out of that house with my head held high, choosing myself for the first time in 6 years. Because real strength isn't about winning back a seat at someone else's table. It's about realizing you were always worthy of your own. And if this story moved you, if you believe loyalty and dignity still matter, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Kindness True Stories, because these are the stories that remind us who we really are.